So last time we talked about some special sets of angles created when two lines are cut by a transversal. Today we're going to talk about what happens when those two lines are parallel lines. And we're going to start with the corresponding angles postulate. Now, since this is a postulate, this is not something that we can prove. This is something that has been true every time we've tried it out, every time we've tested it, but there's been no way to actually prove it. And what the corresponding angles postulate says: if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then corresponding angles are congruent. Remember, that means they have the same measure. So looking at our figure here, that means that angles 1 and 5 will be congruent angles. That means angles 2 and 6 will be congruent. 4 and 8 will be congruent. 3 and 7 will be congruent. So corresponding angles are congruent. And you may notice that, and we'll see this in the next problem, that there will be more than just a couple angles that end up being the same. So let's try this example. Okay, we're going to find all 7 of these other angles in this one. So we know this angle, which should be angle 3, is 55 degrees. Its corresponding angle is angle 7. So we know that one also has to be 55. Now, if we look at this, these two angles are a linear pair. So if angle 3 is 55 degrees, then angle 4 has to be 125 degrees because they have to add up to 180. We also know that angle 3 and angle 1 are vertical angles, and the vertical angle theorem tells us that vertical angles are congruent. So we know that 1 and 3 are congruent, so 1 is 55 degrees. We also know 2 and 4 have to be congruent, so 2 is 125 degrees. We can rewrite that whole process, or redo that whole thing on the other side, and we get that 6 and 8 are 125 degrees, and that 5 is also 55 degrees. So we know that measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 5 and the measure of angle 7 are all 55 degrees. And the measure of angle 2 and the measure of angle 6 and the measure of angle 8 and the measure of angle 4 are all 125 degrees. So notice, when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, you only have 2 angle measures. It's just repeated over and over. The trick is to remember which ones are congruent and which ones are supplementary. And that brings us into our other 3 angle relationships. All of these are theorems, which means we can prove them. They are all based on the corresponding angles postulate. And then we could take that and prove all of these. So alternate interior angle theorem. If two parallel lines, I'm going to abbreviate here, parallel lines are cut by a T-versal, transversal, then alternate interior angles are congruent. So that means that 4 and 5 are congruent, 3 and 6 are congruent. Alternate interior angle theorem. If you know the lines are parallel, you know alternate interior angles are congruent. Same side interior angles. So if two parallel lines are cut by T-versal, then same side interior angles are, and if we go back and look at this picture where we filled everything in, these two are same side interior. They're not congruent, but they are supplementary. So same side interiors are the oddballs in this setup, because all the others will be congruent, but same side interiors will be supplementary. So that means that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 is 180, and the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 6, these two, is 180. And then our third and final theorem, alternate exterior angles. And it's going to say alternate exterior angles are congruent. So we know that 1 and 8 will be congruent. We know that 2 and 7 will be congruent. So, our corresponding angles postulate and our three theorems all together will basically let us find any of the angles if we only know one angle when two lines that are parallel are cut by a transversal. So let's try this again. Here we've got a bunch of numbered angles. Notice these two lines are parallel and these two lines are parallel. So here we've got a situation where two parallel lines are cut by two parallel transversals. So, we know that these two angles are supplementary because they're a linear pair. So 115 from 180 is 65, so angle 1 is 65 degrees. We know that these two angles, they're same side interior angles, so they have to add up to 180, so we know that the measure of angle 5 is also 65 degrees. Same thing with the 115 and angle 6. So we know the measure of angle 6 is 65 degrees. We know that, I'm going to erase all these so we can start over. We know that these two are corresponding. So the measure of angle 2 is 115 degrees. Then we know that 2 and 3 are alternate interior angles. So angle 3 also has to be 115 degrees. And then we could look at, for angle 4, we could say 5 and 4 are alternate interiors, or we could say 3 and 4 are a linear pair. Either way, we're going to get that angle 4 is 65 degrees. So if you know one angle, you can figure out all the rest. We could even figure out the non-numbered angles if we wanted to. So, for example 3a, these are alternate interior angles. I encourage you to make sure you can identify them before you try to do any work. Alternate interior angles are congruent, so that's 95 degrees. For B, these are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are congruent, so that's 131 degrees. For C, these are alternate exterior angles. Alternate exterior angles are congruent, so that's 125 degrees. And for D, these are same side interior. Remember, those are the different ones. Those are supplementary. If we call that X, we've got 128 plus X equals 180. So that's going to be 52 degrees. Now we can take this a step further if we've got algebraic expressions in there. On example 4a, these are same side interior. We will add them up to get 180. 17x minus 5 plus 19x plus 5 equals 180. Combine like terms, that's going to give us 36x equals 180. The 5's cancel out. Then divide by 36, so x equals 5. On part B, these are alternate exterior angles. So they are congruent. What do we do with congruent things? We set them equal to each other. So we've got negative 5 plus 21x equals 19x plus 5. Subtract 19x from both sides to get 2x on the left. Add 5 to both sides to get 10 on the right. Then we'll divide by 2. So again, x is 5. That's just a coincidence. So when the two lines are parallel and cut by a transversal, you have all these special angle relationships. Corresponding angles are congruent. Alternate interior angles are congruent. Alternate exterior angles are congruent. And same side interior or consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So using those four concepts, you can solve for all of the other angles when you know one. So do those practice problems. Make sure if it tells you to find an angle measure, like in these last two, it just told us to solve for x. Make sure you pay attention if you need to plug x back in. So do those practice problems, check your work. Please ask questions. Get ready for that mastery check. Good luck.